Welcome back to my train room. This is Falling Up 90, and today we'll be talking about MTH right after this. So as many of you have probably heard within the last day, MTH has decided to close their doors. After 40 years, Mike believes that this is the right time to close. It's pretty sad, but I can perfectly understand that. They were a pretty interesting brand. I wasn't too die-hard into them. I know some guys are, but we still have plenty of manufacturers out there. We can pick up some really nice models at this day and age, but MTH, I was a fan of some of their stuff, and we're going to take a look at some of them right now. So in the front here, we have the CN ST70M-2, followed by a KCS and Canadian Pacific ES44AC, and over here we have the CN-9. I'm not entirely sure when these models were first released. I'm guessing sometime around 2010 is either when the -9 or the M-2 were released, and the two Gevos here, I think they came out in 2014. The real-life model, the real-life Locomotives, I know the KCS came out in 2010, while the CP Gevo was built in 2012. So this is pretty much my whole roster of MTH locomotives in my fleet, but the most prized possession of my MTH models actually comes from the rolling stock. So over here, I got this is a 5-car passenger set of the Norfolk and Western Powhatan Aero. This first came out in 2011, and I picked this up in the spring of 2012. To be honest with you, these are some of my absolute favorite passenger cars in my entire fleet. Very impressed with them. They have that, interiors with lights, and they do not flicker. They have LEDs, and they have circuitry where once the train's under power and the interiors light up, the train could run over a dirty spot or anything, but that does not mean that the lights will go out. They will stay constant. In fact, if you take the coach off, even for a couple seconds off the rails, the lights will still stay on for a bit. So that's very innovative. These are very nice HO scale passenger cars, and these are very hard to find now. And if you do pick these up, these will not be cheap. So I'm very fortunate to have them, and I will, have these for as long as I'm in the hobby. So back to the diesels here. Reason why I got into them was I've heard about how strong MTH diesels were, so I decided to give them a try. First, I got the CP one, and then a short time later, I picked up the other three, and I have been impressed by these locomotives. They are strong pullers, and that was a huge reason why I wanted to pick these up. As far as detail, heard things about that. I think they look great. Some people may not think that they're perfect. There's always another competitor out there that may have put something that may have put a little bit more detail, but I find these to be really, really nice. So hats off to that. Now it should be noted that all these locomotives are DCC ready. So, I have just a terminal and track. I don't have any DCC. I have a large locomotive collection. Almost all of them are DC models, and it's just going to be too much time and too much money to invest in DCC. So, I'm not opposed to getting a DCC model, but it's just going to be a big, hassle. If I get invited to a model railroad club, and they say, hey, bring a locomotive with you, I've always got a few DCC and sound locomotives, but for the most part, these are the kind of locomotives that I'd like to get. DCC ready, really, really good performance and pretty good detail for the most part. So these are perfect. So this is where we find an Achilles heel of MTH. Um, in the digital market, they had locomotives that not only ran on DCC but DCS. I think that DCS really is a superimposed version of DCC. It could have more features. An example would be like you would have a horn or a whistle on a locomotive and you can quail it. DCC at the time, I don't know if they still can, have that effect. It's pretty cool. But MTH was the only manufacturer to put this out in HO. DCS system, I'm not sure how much they cost, but DCC isn't cheap, and I definitely don't think DCS would be any cheaper than that. So to have that system where only one brand, can be using that, isn't going to be totally worth it unless you specifically buy MTH locomotives. Now this leads us into another problem. MTH is known for decoders failing. Just like every brand out there are some errors, but MTH was pretty common for this. I don't think this is entirely true. I have no proof behind this. I have never experienced this before. But I just have a theory that these locomotives are really meant to run on DCS. Having them run on DCC is just a bonus. Now, of course, they're both digital, and they both have positive and negative track. But the thing is, if you have locomotives that are primarily meant to run on one system, it may not run perfectly on the other one. Or maybe it's because the electronics are used to having it run the DCS system that when it goes on an entirely different system, it might not, cooperate correctly. So, you have locomotives that run perfectly fine for a long time. That's great. But then there's other times where a locomotive comes immediately out of the box and you already have a failed decoder. Or a couple months later, the decoder just suddenly goes out. But, I may not be correct on this, but that's just my take on it. And that's probably why they've had so many failed decoders. And to top it off, the other really big problem would be customer service. So when you do get a locomotive with the DCC, DCS, and sound, and you pay good money for it, and it fails on you, that's a disappointment enough. But when you have to contact MTH because of your failed locomotive, this was an issue of its own. They were known for having limited hours, and they didn't really communicate with customers as well as other brands. And, a big issue is you never know when that decoder could go out. You take care of your locomotives, and you want them to last as long as possible. And at times when these locomotives go out of warranty, that's a really big issue. Because you send them into MTH and, the cost to diagnose it's going to cost you something. But then the cost to have it taken care of is, you have no idea how much that's going to cost. And at times it's going to be as much as a new locomotive altogether. So it's almost like, what's the point? And that was a really big fault. So a lot of people really didn't have good integrity with MTH. And if you wanted a Gevo or a Dash 9, there were other brands out there and they didn't give you that issue. So that was really a setback. However, though, when you have the DCC ready models, you completely bypass all that because they will not have these electronic failures. And you can put in whatever decoder you'd like. But for me, I just like to keep them plain and, they run as smooth as necessary. So all of my locomotives from MTH are just modern diesels. But modern diesels consist of a very small part of my entire HO locomotive population. My biggest thing would be steam locomotives. I'm a huge fan of them in HO. I have all kinds. I have probably one of the greatest variety of most people out there. I have any from cheap, low end plastic little switchers all the way to really high end streamlined brass models. I've got 2-cylinder locomotives. I have 4-cylinder duplexes, articulators. I have a geared locomotive. So to say I'm into steam is an understatement. Now MTH has put out a bunch of steam locomotives. Some look pretty desirable to me. I think they look really good. They're not perfect, but they're acceptable by me, and they are really strong, especially like that Allegheny they put out, for example. The problem is, though, is that they only put them out for DCS and DCC with sound. So unlike their diesels, there was no option for DCC ready. So that kind of turned me away from them. I was really interested in some of their locomotives like the H10 and the Allegheny, but not having that DCC ready option really didn't make them a choice. I didn't want to pay really good money for that model only for it to fail on me. And the other thing is, this is not a popular opinion, but I'm just not into steam locomotives with sound in HO. I don't think they sound really that great compared to what the actual locomotives would sound like, whether it's chuff frequency, the emphasis of sound when the locomotive's pulling a heavy train versus when it's just pulling a tender, even just how the sound system sounds all together coming out of the speaker box. It's just not my thing. I know that's not a popular opinion, but it's mine. And if I really wanted to make a video of a steam locomotive with sound, what I would do is that I would like to run a model steam locomotive and then put in an actual sound bit and sync it up where the locomotive runs at the right speed of what that train actually ran at. Now, I'm not trying to deter people away from buying these MTH locomotives with DCS and sound. This is mostly opinionated, but there's some evidence behind failures and all the customer service. And once this their customer service goes out 2 years after they discontinue locomotives, it will get a little bit harder for someone to diagnose the problems with your locomotive. So that's kind of like a buyer beware. Now, I don't know if people are going to be stocking up on MTH locomotives because they're going to be going away soon. But you might see some out there that we all know figure could go down in price, and that just could be because there will be less availability to get them properly fixed should they break down. Now, the other thing with MTH is, noticeably, is that they're a pretty aggressive company with lawsuits. In the O scale market, their biggest rival obviously was Lionel. They had a massive lawsuit with them over trade secrets. I'm not going to get into the full details about the lawsuits and what they completely involved, but that was a big one. They got in one with Korea Brass, with QSI. I even think Broadway Limited, something to do with a GG1. But there was a lot of things like that. All of which I believe are some of the patents they have, against Broadway Limited are set to expire next year. Maybe that could be a reason that the company has decided to close its doors. But overall, seeing a track record like that, it's kind of controversial. But one good thing that MTH did do involving lawsuits was when the Union Pacific filed one over trademark issues. And in 2006, they finally came to an agreement, and this was good news for the entire model railroad industry. Not just MTH, but a lot of brands benefited from that. So, that, you know, as aggressive as they were, that was a really, really good thing that came out of that. So, you know, MTH, that's a very interesting history behind them. Now, MTH and Lionel have a much better relationship at this day and age. I know that Lionel gave them the licensing to put out the Lionel corporate template under their name. That's pretty interesting. But the really unhidden secret is MTH's logo actually came from a Lionel template model. Very interesting to see that. See how one brand has inspiration derived from another one, even with all the controversy that happened years later. Very interesting. In conclusion, MTH has had a significant impact on the model routing industry in more than one scale. Obviously, I just focus on HO because this is the platform that I like to run, and even then, you see a bunch of interesting things that MTH has put out. You know, the DCS system didn't really work out as much as MTH wanted it to, but it's interesting that they put it out in the HO scale market. There's also models that weren't really available outside of brass, which MTH kind of put out, like the DMIR Yellowstone. That's a really, really cool model, and I guarantee you that I can pull a garage door off of its hinges. And even some European models that they put out, which weren't really anywhere else you could find in the American sales market. So it's nice that MTH did that. And of course, you can't go MTH HO without saying the passenger cars. You know, obviously they're one of my favorite passenger cars in the scale, and they were the first to innovate that circuit board where the lights won't flicker, they stay constant, and they're really well detailed. That's outstanding. And I think a couple other brands kind of followed up with that. So hopefully that's going to continue in the HO scale market. But yeah, MTH is going to be missed. We don't know what the future is because this whole closing of them is to happen in 11 months. Now, whether or not there's a buyer that comes out there and maybe could possibly buy the entire line of them and all the tooling, who knows? But all we know right now is 11 months from now, MTH will be gone. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and we'll be seeing if I can pick up any more MTH models of interest. But for now, this is what I've got. I hope to see you guys next time.